In hot countries, the sunlight is much more intense than in our country. The inhabitants have dark red skin like the color of mahogany. In hotter countries, they were burned until their bodies turned black. The scientist told in this story has just come from cold countries to live in the South. He thought he could roam around like he did in his hometown, but immediately had to give up that idea. Like other thoughtful people, he had to stay in his room. The doors were tightly closed, looking like the whole house was sleeping or like an abandoned house. Even worse, the house where this scholar stayed was exposed to sunlight all day long, from morning until night. It was unbearable. Our scientist was a very athletic young man, but because of the heat, he fell into a terrifying condition. He lost a lot of weight, and even his shadow shrank. It has never been so small, just because of the scorching heat. Only at night, when the sun set, did he and his shadow regain some strength. That moment was truly happy. As soon as the light in the room was turned on, the shadow seemed to reach out to regain strength. The scientist went out to the balcony to do some exercises, and when the stars sparkled in the sky, he thought he was alive again. At that time, on the balconies in the streets in hot countries, every house had a balcony. Everyone went out there to enjoy the cool air, even people with dark skin. Shoemakers, tailors, everyone goes out to play. People placed tables and chairs in front of the door, and there were lights everywhere. People talking, people singing, people riding cars, people walking. There were mules trotting, music around their necks tinkling. The bustling scenes in the streets take place in all shapes and sizes. Here the children are singing along. Farther away, a person wearing a long hat and a robe was carrying the funeral, and, almost immediately following it, a brass band was happily going to the concert. Only the house right in front of the scientist and number 39's house remained silent. There must still be people living in the house, otherwise the plants growing outside would not be able to live and flower. Someone has to water it. When afternoon came, the door opened slightly, but even the rooms facing the street were still dark. From inside the house came the sound of music. Our scientist thinks that music is wonderful, but that is probably just an opinion, because he finds everything in this country wonderful, except the heat. He asked the homeowner whose house was in the house in front of the door, but he did not know, had never seen anyone there, and the music he thought was terribly dull. It and number 39's probably someone who wants to play a song that and number 39's too difficult for their level, dozen and #39's play well but still tries. One night, the scientist suddenly woke up with a start. When he slept, he always left the window open, and the wind still gently lifted a corner of the curtain. At that time, he saw a strange, sparkling light on the balcony in front of the door. The flowers looked like flames, their bright colors shining on the face of a beautiful girl standing in the middle of the street. The scientist and number 39's eyes were dazzled, but it must be said that when he woke up, he opened his eyes a little too much, so it was not strange. He jumped out of bed, hid behind the curtain, and looked at the house in front of the door. The young woman and the magical light had disappeared. Only the flowers are still as beautiful as before. The balcony door was slightly open, and a mesmerizing music sounded inside. Who in number 39's over there? Which way to enter the house? The doors are closed. Do any of them open to the street? One night, the scientist was standing on the balcony. In the room, behind him there was a light on, so he saw his shadow shining on the wall in front of him. Yes, he saw his shadow among the flowers planted on the balcony, and every time he bent down, it also bent down, obediently, just like the other shadows. Maybe my shadow is the only one living in that house. It sits among the flowering trees. But the balcony door was open, so why didn't N-39 he come in and see what was in the house and then come back and tell me? He made a joke. Okay, just go in. Saying that, he nodded his head and the shadow also nodded. So, come in, why are you just standing around like that? He stood up and went back in, pulling down the curtains. But if anyone was here, they would see the shadow also turn towards the other door and disappear into the house. The next day, the scientist went out to drink coffee and read the newspaper. Out in the sunlight, he suddenly exclaimed, "What does this mean? I don't and number 39 have the ball anymore. Last night he really left me and never came back. What will happen to me?" Losing the ball made him discouraged. If he only lost his shadow, he wouldn't and #39 be too worried, but he knows the story of a person losing his shadow that all children in cold countries like. When he returned, if he told this story, people would probably think he was following a story that everyone knew, and that would be extremely annoying. Therefore, he decided not to mention anything about it. That is the best policy. At night, he went out to the balcony again, with the lamp still lit behind him. Stop crouching and then stretch yourself out, but it and number 39 to no avail. The shadow no longer appeared. The scientist angrily said, "And quat, humph. It and number 39 no use, and quat." It was very uncomfortable, but in a hot country, everything grows very quickly, so after 8 days, the scientist was very happy to see that when he came out into the sun, there was a new shadow under his feet, probably the root of the shadow. Old remains. After 3 weeks, he had a relatively suitable shadow. When he returned to the northern countries, it would probably be even larger. Returning to his hometown, the scientist wrote a book about truth, compassion, and beauty in this world. Days passed, months passed and years passed. One evening, while he was working in his room, someone suddenly knocked on the door. "Please come in." But no one entered. He went to open the door. In front of him was a thin man, making him feel compassion. It should also be added that that person was dressed very luxuriously, and must have belonged to the upper class in society. The scholar asks, "Please tell me your name." The other person replied, "I knew right away that you could N and #39 recognize me. I have swelled up a bit, now I have flesh and bones." "Ha! You probably could N and #39 have imagined that you would meet me as plump as I am today. You don't and number 39 get your shadow anymore, huh?" Of course he could N and #39 imagine that I would return. Only since separating from him have I been happy and have nothing to complain about. If it is necessary to redeem freedom, the conditions are now there. Having said that, he shook the belongings dangling from the strap of his watch and placed his hand on the large gold chain hanging around his neck. Every finger of his is sparkling with real diamond rings. The shadow said, "My story is not normal. As for you, you are not the same person as others. When you gave me permission to leave you, I did not hesitate, and see, I did it. However, as happy as I am, I still want to see him and my hometown again before I die. I know he has a new shadow. Do I have to pay it an allowance because it has replaced me? And if I want to redeem myself, how much should I pay you? Is it really you? Even when we fall asleep, we never imagine that the shadow of a person can return to the form of a real person. Please tell me how much I have to pay, because I want to end my debt with you. What are you saying? Debt and debt? You have the same freedom as everyone else. Sit down, old friend. Tell me a little about your adventures, the fun you saw in hot countries, especially in the house in front of my house the other day. The shadow sat down and said, "Very well, but you must promise me not to tell anyone in the city that I am your shadow. I am planning to get married because now I have enough strength to raise a family." Okay, Don and number 39. Be afraid. I will definitely not tell anyone what you are. Say it, I promise to keep it true. A gentleman speaks one word. This ball is no less. It is also worth seeing how the shadow became a real person. He wore black clothes made of fine fabric and shiny boots. It wears a tall spring-loaded hat that can be flattened like a cake. It and number 39's the latest style of hat. He began to speak. I and number 39 tell you. As he spoke, he stomped his shiny boots on the new shadow of the scientist, who was now lying at his feet like a poodle. This shadow was afraid that the other shadow wanted his boots, but the shadow lying on the ground remained silent and listened to the story. It wants to hear how to be free and master yourself. And quote, do you know who lives in the room in front of the door? Yes, it is the Muse, the most poetic person alive. I only lived in her house for 3 weeks, but I spent more than 300 years reading poetry and books. And quote, learned. I have seen and understood everything in the world. And quote, the scientist shouted, Muse. Yes, that and number 39's right. She often lives in seclusion in big cities. Muse? I only saw her once and still love her to this day. She stood on the balcony and glowed like an aurora borealis. Go on. That day you were standing on the balcony, you turned back, then what? So when I entered a slightly dark waiting room, I saw a row of rooms connected to each other with black and bright lights that blinded my eyes. I Don and number 39 dare to take risks because I and number 39 am afraid that if I go there, I will no longer be this shadow body. I have learned from his carefulness. I ducked into a corner and looked. Then what did you see? I think I saw everything and was about to tell you about it. But I ask you one thing. And at least Don and number 39 think I and number 39 am arrogant. Can you stop being a slave to me? Sorry, it and number 39's just a long-standing habit, you know that. Tell me more. Yes, I have seen and know everything. How? How are the rooms inside? Does it look like a forest or a temple? Or is it like the sky? Like that and like many other things. I didn't and 39 go in but stood outside the waiting room, but it was a very good place, because I could see everything. Just standing there is like standing in the Muse and number 39's palace. But what did you see? Do you see the gods, the heroes and knights competing? And the children telling their dreams? I told you I was standing there. Of course I see everything. If only you were in my position at that time, you would have become a superhero. But a shadow like me can only progress to become a human. But human nature is selfish, so of course I won. And number 39. Tell you everything I know. It was in that waiting room that I first realized my true nature. Like the muse, I am just a reflection. You should remember that sometimes I am even bigger than you, and under the moonlight people can see me more clearly. Continue reading part 2 of the old story. Thank you for joining us for today's fairy tale. We hope these stories bring joy and meaning to your day. If you love our channel, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any exciting tales. Wishing you a good night and sweet dreams. See you in the next story.